It's election time in America again. You know what that means. Despite being more than a year away from the 2020 presidential election, the media hype is already beginning to build steam. Be prepared to enjoy a non stop flow of endless political ads, news coverage, viral videos, and vitriolic online arguments that will likely be taking the country by storm in the next 15 months. As of the time I'm writing this, it is a day before the very first Democratic debates in Miami. For 2 nights, there will be two separate rounds of debates with different candidates that qualified, premiering each night to face off against one another. Depending on who does well and who doesn't, these debates will either serve as the initial foundations of the campaigns for these candidates, or filter out the candidates who just aren't viable enough to make the Democratic nomination. I'm not making this video to analyze what comes out of these debates, though they will be interesting to watch nonetheless. Instead, I'm making this video to highlight an inaccurate criticism Democrats and progressives often receive from their Republican and conservative counterparts, which is the false perception that Democrats and progressives focus too much on identity politics. This is something I see a lot when people complain about figures such as Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, and Pete Buttigieg. From the view of those who claim that identity politics is solely a component of progressive and left wing ideology, the belief goes that Democrats favor forming policy around superficial categorizations of people, whereas conservatives and Republicans are superior because right leaning people prefer to put aside these arbitrary differences and create legislation based around merit and pragmaticism. This, of course, is simply not true. Most Republican figures are also engaging in identity politics, it just doesn't appear to be identity politics to their voting base. Going forward, as the campaign season escalates and people get heated, it is important to be as informed as possible. And more importantly, this false belief needs to be dispelled so that the conversation is put back on an even playing field. The two primary aspects of Republican identity politics are the terms Christian values and, more recently, Western culture. When it comes to religion, there are many faiths and denominations practiced within the United States, but roughly 70% of the US population is estimated to be some sort of Christian affiliation. This is an overwhelming majority of the population and is a larger percentage than all other religious groups and even non religious affiliations combined. And yet, despite this clear majority, right leaning politicians will stir up anxieties by often claiming that US Christian values are under attack. One of the most blatant examples of this are the multiple times Donald Trump, despite little record of him consistently practicing Christian faith and living an extravagant non Christian lifestyle, tries to appeal to his religious supporters by using religious parlance. I will give examples of this in the description box below. However, he shouldn't be singled out because he is by no means the only conservative that does this. It may not be obvious why this is identity politics at first, until you analyze just exactly how the idea of Christian values is being used to push a political agenda. There are many denominations of Christianity that support gay rights, abortion, easy access to birth control, transgender rights, anti militaristic pacifism, etc. There are many denominations of Christianity that are very liberal. Yet, Christian values is always almost exclusively used by the right when trying to restrict women's rights, LGBTQ plus people's rights, and the rights of religious minorities. This is because when politicians say Christian values, they don't really mean all Christians. What they are really doing is trying to gain the support of religious subgroups in the United States that choose to approach these topics from a religious perspective. They don't push for bans on abortion or gay marriage because all Christians want to ban abortion or gay marriage. They do it because it furthers the interests of the religious voting blocs that put these politicians in office. And this is by definition identity politics. Now let's look at the term Western culture. First, we need to define what that is, which can be very tricky since it means different things to different people. And herein lies another reason why the phrasing Western heritage and Western culture is identity politics. The US is a Western country. This isn't disputed, and there are no significant internal forces within the United States that are trying to change this. Most people living in the United States believe in the ideals of liberal democracy, things such as freedom of speech, freedom of choice, peaceful exchange of power, pro education, pro tolerance, pro equality, and democratic rule, and so on. Most of our laws that we continue to maintain were inherited from our European legal systems. 90% of the country primarily speaks the language of European descent, and 90% of the country is either Christian or irreligious, which mirrors trends in other Western countries. Externally, there are almost no threats that could realistically reshape the United States into a non Western country. Europe and Oceania are already aligned with us. Russia is a declining state. Islamic terrorism is underground and limited in scale. China's rise to power is mostly just economic. Africa has minimal global influence. And South America is in many ways already Western. And yet, again, we see many Republicans and right leaning politicians implying in their rhetoric that somehow Western culture is at risk of greatly diminishing or disappearing. And this can be confusing, especially since the United States is currently the sole superpower on planet Earth, unless what you really mean by Western culture is the influence of European Americans. As demographics begin to shift and the United States becomes more racially diverse, anxieties among a lot of white Americans, particularly those who live in traditional, rural, non diverse communities, have begun to show. This is because they are beginning to realize they no longer have unlimited cultural and political capital. There are many ethnic groups and cultures living in the United States that have assimilated to our way of life. But because many on the right see white America as the default, when society's attitudes begin to catch up and reflect our growing diversity, they don't see it as an expansion of the American dream, but rather the dilution of what they consider to be real America. Rap music is Western music. Mexican food is Western food. Asian immigrants are partaking in the long-standing Western tradition of immigration to the New World. But none of this is recognized as such by the right because these people aren't associated with traditional white America. And so many on the right tend to vote for politicians that tell them, we will defend our Western heritage, or we will work to preserve American culture, because whether they realize it or not, the subtext is really saying, we will work to preserve European America's dominance on our society and institutions. Rural white Americans vote for politicians that will maintain their influence. And again, this is to the very T, identity politics. The United States is not a Christian nation. The founding fathers may have used their personal faith to inform their initial structuring of the country, but they just as equally drew upon Greco-Roman philosophies as well. No one is trying to say the US is a Greco-Roman civilization. The US is not a white Anglo nation either. Indigenous people have inhabited this land long before European settlers arrived, and the descendants of the indigenous are still present in our communities. The US has always had black people, and with that, Western African influences. Our two most populated states, Texas and California, were once Spanish holdings and still have significant Latino populations. But if you see America as a country that is only meant for white Christians, then of course you're not going to see how Republican positions on these subjects are actually identity politics. If, however, you recognize the truth that America has been and always will be a country of many different religions, races, and cultures, it becomes easier to realize that words like Christian values and Western culture are really just political pandering. Thank you all for listening. If you like this kind of content, give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing. This is my third video on my new channel, and I'm planning on discussing topics that I don't see talked about that much on YouTube. With that said, I hope you all have an excellent day, and I'll see you all next time.